Good evening all and welcome. Tonight I have a collection of trucker stories for you to listen to. So buckle up because it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This is my father's story, and happened when he was an 18-year-old gas station attendant in the late 70s. And without the help of a certain long-haul trucker, I probably wouldn't be here. The gas station was 24 hours, and my dad was the only one working the night shift from 11 to 7, when a guy comes in who just gives him the creeps. He seemed sketchy, and was wearing a tight jacket and pants, and you could tell he had something in his pants under the jacket. Mind you, this was during the summer, and it was warm, so why was he wearing a jacket to begin with? It was later confirmed he was on drugs. A lot of the truck drivers use this station, as it's the only 24-hour gas station in a long stretch of the highway. They also had a big lot where truckers could park and sleep or just take a break. Well, on this night, it was just my dad and the sketchy dude, and one trucker in there who he kind of knew, as he came in frequently enough to be conversational. And he asked him slyly if he wouldn't mind if the trucker stayed to hang out until the sketchy dude left. Well, after looking at the stocked shelves for several minutes while sneaking peeks at my dad, the guy eventually looked fed up and got into his blue car and sped off. The cool truck driver guy hung out with my dad a little longer until another couple of guys came in to use the booth they had to eat a sandwich. I should also point out that it was pretty middle of nowhere in rural southeast United States and the 1970s. CBs and landline it was, and my dad had only a landline in the store, and not a protective weapon at all. So the hours pass, and my dad had shaken off the paranoia when all of a sudden this guy in a car comes hauling ass into the lot, jumps out, and sprints into the store hollering he needs a phone. He didn't have a CB, nor did he see a phone at the other station. He also wasn't familiar with the area, and my dad's station was the first place he found. He calls 911 to report that he had walked in on a gas station 40 miles back, which happened to be the next closest gas station, to find the attendant shot and dead. No one else was around, and the only other piece of information is that a blue car was speeding out of the lot when the trucker pulled in. Apparently they eventually apprehended the guy in the blue car, and my dad confirmed that it was the sketchy dude from earlier in the night, and they charged him with murder and armed robbery. The long-haul trucker who waited around with my dad that night, thanks, and I hope you're keeping it real. Also worth adding that apparently the sketchy guy in the blue car was already a bad apple who was either being looked for or on probation. He was in the system, and my dad and myself are lucky to be alive. I once dated a girl who was a trucker. She mostly did short haul, but occasionally had to run loads to a warehouse out of state, and when she did, I usually tagged along. There was this one time that we were on the road, and we pulled into this nasty, abandoned-looking truck stop right on the New Mexico-Texas border for fuel. All fueled up, we headed inside to see if we could get something to eat. The inside of this place looked like something out of Fallout, mostly empty shelves with random dust-covered canned goods and old boxes of this and that, lights flickering and making that pinging sound, with not a soul to be found. We grabbed a few bags of chips and waited near the register, and after making some noise and waiting for like 5 minutes, we put the stuff back and went outside. Surrounding her truck were about 10 guys who all looked pretty scary. Remembering at that precise moment I had left the gun in the truck, my stomach understandably dropped. A biker then rolled up and talked to the 2 guys near the back of the truck for a minute, then does the slitting throat motion. My girl is shaking and close to crying, and I'm pretty sure I've already crapped my pants. The biker throws his hands up, tells everyone to move and walks over to us. He then very politely tells us that someone had stolen a trailer of his up north, and he was looking for it. This one wasn't it, and he apologized for the drama, reached into his pocket and grabbed something and sticks it in my hand, and tells me he was very sorry for the trouble. As he's walking away, I look into my hand. It's a bag of weed. We got the hell out of there pretty fast. Good weed though, and we joked about trying to find him on the way back to get a bit more. These are some of my grandpa's stories while he was a state trooper, and recounted a story where a group of college students were embarking on their journey for spring break, when, during their course of the drive, they suffered a collision with a semi-truck. Amidst the chaos, 3 of them emerged from the wreck seemingly unscathed. My grandfather arrived and began surveying the scene. The car's roof had been peeled back like a tin can, and the brunt of the devastation was concentrated on the passenger side. The 3 college students were eerily quiet, not answering questions very helpfully, and clearly in a state of shock. So my grandfather approached the vehicle to inspect it further, his concern unwavering as he sought to offer assistance to the unseen 4th passenger who hadn't actually left the vehicle yet. From his vantage point behind and to the left, the individual appeared unscathed, but as he rounded to the front, he discovered to his horror that the right side of the passenger's head had been obliterated by the force of the collision. In a separate story, I found myself inadvertently delving into the dark recesses of my grandfather's past while looking through old police files and photographs stored away in his filing cabinets. Among the relics of his law enforcement career lay a haunting image. My curiosity piqued, and so I asked my grandfather about the macabre photo, prompting him to share a tragic story. There was this very tired truck driver who had been doing too many hours, and he succumbed to exhaustion. In so, he somehow passed out, managed to open his door while doing so, and not wearing a seatbelt. I'm sure you can add together what happened. Consequently, he plummeted to the ice-cold asphalt, where he was promptly flattened by his truck wheels, leaving his corpse crushed and lifeless like crisps under bison. The task of recovering his shattered shell from the icy embrace of the winter ground fell upon my grandfather and his colleagues, a grim duty requiring them to scrape off the remnants of a life come short from the frigid pavement. As you can imagine, it was not his favorite job. My brother is a truck driver, and as you can imagine, being on the road so often leads you to see some of the most terrifying things life has to offer. This one story he shared with me really shook him up, and it started when he pulled into a rest stop one fall afternoon. The fluorescent glows of the gas station lights illuminated the scene of a middle-aged woman in a vibrant pink Jeep surrounded by a flurry of small dogs on leashes. Intrigued by the spectacle, my brother watched for a moment before continuing with his routine. He climbed back into his truck, the hum of the engine providing a backdrop for his thoughts as he merged back onto the freeway. But minutes later, the tranquility of the drive was shattered by the sudden appearance of the pink Jeep, which was hurtling past him at alarming speed. Before he could fully process what was happening, the vehicle veered sharply to the left, tires screeching as it collided with the dirt median. The Jeep somersaulted through the air, a whirlwind of metal, before coming to a rest in a crumpled heap. As you can imagine, my brother was shocked and slammed on the brakes and leapt out of the truck, adrenaline pumping through his veins. Amidst the wreckage, the woman lay motionless in a shallow ditch, water seeping around her. Her head barely above the surface, she muttered about her beloved dogs. Heart pounding, my brother rushed to her side, his mind racing as he assessed the situation. Around them, The lifeless form of the dogs lay strewn across the ground in pieces, a disturbing sight. It wasn't before long that the ambulance was sent for the woman, who was still pleading for her dogs as she was taken to the hospital. My brother never knew her fate. My brother never did discover her fate. I'm a long-haul trucker. I see and deal with a lot of weird and scary stuff. There was this time I was traveling up US 93 in Nevada heading to Portland, Oregon for a delivery. It was around 1:30 a.m. and I needed to stop and log my half-hour break. I found a wide spot and pulled off, did my logs up, and made myself a sandwich. While I was eating said sandwich, I noticed a vehicle pull in behind me. I did not get concerned about it, but kept an eye on it while I ate. Then it got strange. I noticed a figure in the headlight of the vehicle approach the back driver's side of my trailer, stop, and looked like they were rubbing the back side of my trailer with their hands. It was suspicious, so I got my pistol out of the lockbox back in the sleeper, cocked and locked it, and slid it behind my waistband and proceeded to climb out of the rig. I walked about 10 feet, keeping my hand on the butt of my pistol, and flicked my flashlight on and aimed it at the person. It was a man, a weird-looking fellow in a dirty, whitish trench coat, long, straggly hair and bald on top. He was rubbing something on the side of my trailer. I hollered at him to stop what he was doing, and he looked up at me, smirked, and without turning his gaze off me, starts walking towards me. I back my way to my door, keeping my hands on my pistol but not pulling it out. I did not feel like my life was in danger at the time. I opened my door and climbed into the rig, shut the door, and locked it. The dude walks up by my door, looks at me, still smirking. I'm thinking this dude is off his rockers, and my half-hour break is over and it's time to go. However, while I'm looking down at him and getting ready to turn the key, I feel my truck rock. I jump and look at my driver's side mirror. Nothing. Then I look over to check my passenger side mirror, and there on my step, face pressed against my passenger side window, is a freaky, perfect replica of an old witch, smiling with a rotten tooth, cocking her head left, then right, and fogging up my window. Needless to say, I about sucked my seat up to my arse, but that's not the end of it. The dude then jumps up on my driver's side step and proceeds to start licking the window. Then the witch lady starts smacking the window with the palm of her hand over and over. The dude starts telling me to open up, that they're friendly, and insists to know what I have in the trailer. Now I feel threatened. I pull the pistol out and the chick immediately disappears off the passenger side step. The dude laughs, jumps up and down on the step, then grins, touches his finger to his nose and jumps off my step. I fired my truck up and took the hell off. Never did see any headlights following me, thank God. Disturbing travelers, let's not meet again. Many years ago, I was doing what is called a meet and turn. This is where a driver that is domiciliated out of a city will drive halfway to its destination, while a driver domiciliated out of that destination will drive halfway with a load that is destined for my city. We meet in a parking lot, switch trailers and drive back home. I had been on this run for a few months and found that I always got to the meet point about an hour before the other driver. It was a dark and empty dirt lot at 3 a.m., so I would stretch out across the seat and take a short nap. One night, about 10 minutes into my nap, I was awoken by a barking dog. I tried to ignore it, but it carried on for several minutes and got louder as the dog got closer. Soon it became apparent the dog was right outside my truck barking at me. Okay, either this dog is Lassie and trying to alert me of something, or else he's just a pain in the ass and I'll need to throw something at him to scare him off. It's important to note, the barking had been going on for a good 10 minutes at this point. So I sat up and looked out the window. Standing there, Mere inches on the other side of the glass was a man of about 35. He was a large fellow, and it was he barking at me. His eyes were crazy, and he was frothing at the mouth a little. This scene really held my full attention for a moment. The sheer creepiness of this struck me. Gently, and making an absolute minimum of sudden movement, I reached down and started my truck and slowly pulled away. He chased me, much like you might expect an angry dog to do, barking the whole time. Needless to say, it played hell with my power naps from then on. Back in the good old late 90s, my dad was a long-haul trucker. He would leave on Sunday night and usually not be back until late Friday or sometimes even Saturday, if he came home at all. My mother would, understandably, get annoyed by this, so once in a while my dad would take the whole family, my mother, younger sister of 4, and myself at 14. So we'd been out in either western Texas or possibly New Mexico, and were heading back east, probably to one of the Carolinas honestly, but I don't recall for sure. This was a usual route for my dad, and we spent a lot of time driving through Texas. So we were near Dallas, maybe a few miles east of, and traffic going both ways is gridlocked, all 6 lanes. At points, we'll move for a bit, but rarely break 35 miles an hour, and it's excruciatingly slow. We are stuck in this for 3 hours. The CB radio is dead quiet, which is strange, and finally we catch a break, and traffic is starting to move again. About 15 minutes later, we found out why traffic had backed up. In the ditch in the middle of the highway is a completely burnt-out shell of a car, what appeared to be a station wagon. Pulling out into the highway, leaving the scene, was a line of 3 hearses. To this day, it's one of the most heartbreaking and disturbing things I have ever witnessed. This actually happened about 5 years ago, in a random country road in Tennessee. It was pitch black darkness, and the only things around were fields, hills, and me. Not a single house. I was getting really tired since the day before I just flew from Washington to Atlanta and was driving from Atlanta to northern Indiana, and out in the middle of nowhere I see a dog in the grass. And normally this is fine, but its eyes weren't glowing from my headlights, which for some reason really made me feel unsettled. The next thing I know, it charged for the tire of my trailer, snarling and barking. Thank God I didn't hit it, and I looked back and it was gone. As bad as it sounds, even if I did hit it, I probably wouldn't have stopped because I was in the middle of nowhere with no service. I've heard a lot of people finding some way to get people to stop their commute in the middle of nowhere and just rob or kill them. It was midnight, and there was no way I was taking a chance. My dad told me and my brothers this story when we were growing up, and it always stuck with me, particularly on long drives when I'm feeling a bit sleepy. The first time I remember hearing it was after I asked him if angels were real, probably around 7. He drove trucks decades ago before I was born, and before labor laws around limits and brakes were more standardized. I'm assuming it's different now. He'd fairly regularly accept calls that would extend his shift where he was driving 24, 36 hours or more without a break, longer than a quick bathroom or food stop. My dad has a pretty mathematical brain. He's the type to make up logic puzzles out of something completely mundane just for fun. Whenever we were driving around town, he'd regularly ask me things like, how long would it take us to get from the house to the store if we're going at 30 miles an hour but had to stop for 5 minutes in the middle because a family of kittens were crossing the road? He'd come up with similar equations for himself while he was driving solo that involved things he was seeing like the odometer, mileage marker, the time, and then he could test his speed based on the equation. One night, after having already driven a particularly long day, he noticed his eyes getting droopier, and the whole roll down the window and blast the music up didn't seem to be helping much. It was a rainy night, and on a pretty windy mountain road without a shoulder to pull over safely. So he started doing those logic games out loud in order to keep alert and awake. He was saying something to the effect of, "I just passed mile marker 146, so what time will it be when I reach 200 if I'm going at 55? Then his eyes closed, took a deep breath, and felt his head do the nod-jerking thing which woke him up with a gasp. He opened his eyes to see he was driving straight towards mile marker 158, which would have sent his whole truck tumbling down a random-ass mountain ravine. He was able to correct the course safely back, but it was only a matter of seconds between that reality and absolute certain death. He insists to this day that he slept through 12 miles of windy mountain road, going over 60 miles an hour, only to wake up at the last moment between life and death. The story usually ends with him tearing up and saying, "I don't know if there are angels, but I know there's something bigger going on in this universe than our human brains have been able to understand yet. If I wouldn't have woken up right when I did, you kids wouldn't be here today, and that's something that feels pretty damn close to spiritual." A good friend of mine told me this story years ago. He's the stereotypical big bad trucker. I've seen some weird stuff with him while driving in South Texas along the border. He never batted an eye, but while telling me this story he had goosebumps and a concerned expression on his face, which from this guy is about the equivalent of a trembling lip and crapping himself. I'll tell this story in the first person, as that's the way he shared it with me. Years ago in the late 90s, I was on my way from the house, Central Texas, heading to Laredo to pick up a load. It was early morning, maybe 4 or 5, and I had just come off a string of days at home, so I knew I wasn't tired. I'm on one of those 2-lane winding roads in the absolute middle of nowhere, when I see something on the side of the road at the edge of my high beams. At first, I just thought it was roadkill, as is usually the case. But when I get closer, I see that it is roadkill, and there's someone crouching over the deer carcass. I remember thinking either this guy is taking the antlers as a trophy, or he's absolutely sick. As I get closer still, I can now see that this guy is eating the deer. He's pulling chunks of meat from the stomach and bringing it up to his face. At this point, he stops mid-motion and looks up at me. Not at the truck, but at me. It stands up, and that's when I see it's huge, brown, and covered in hair. I remember thinking at this point, oh crap, and thinking it's standing on the tiny shoulder looking at me. By this point, maybe 3 seconds have passed, and I'm about to the point of the road he's standing in. I didn't even think of stopping. In fact, I'm starting to lay on it to get the hell out of there. And as I'm passing it, it's looking at me, not at the truck. It's looking through the driver's side windshield at me. He obviously had the intelligence to know that there's a driver in there and knows that's where I'm sitting. As I start to pass him, I can still see its head above the hood of an old needle-nose Pete. Old truck design, where the hood goes straight out from the windshield, known for being tall and difficult to see around. This thing is a giant. I remember seeing what appeared to be human intelligence in his eyes. It scared the crap out of me. I was at a truck stop in Arizona. I was pulling through the fuel island, and right as I was about to leave, roughly 15 cop cars came flying into the parking lot with a SWAT van. They surrounded a truck that was already parked for the night. I heard later that the driver had lost a tire or something off his trailer, and it had killed a guy on the side of the road. Don't know how true that story was, but it sounded plausible. At the old Flying J in El Paso, I had pulled through the fuel islands and was filling out logs and whatnot. After filling up, when someone started screaming for help on the CB radio. It's not unusual to hear kids messing around or whatever, but this sounded like a full-grown man and didn't sound fake. It only happened for about 15 to 20 seconds and then silence. Some people started asking the guy where he was, but we never got a response. Suddenly, another big rig in the parking lot starts to take off right as a few cop cars pull into the truck parking area. The big rig takes out a smaller sign and then jumps a curb out onto the service road for I-10. Turns out a student got pissed at his instructor and stabbed him before leading the chops on a short, high-speed chase. My dad is a truck driver, and around 20 years ago, while resting at the side of the road, he woke up in the morning seeing that his entire trailer was robbed empty. My dad's a heavy sleeper, but his cargo could not have been stolen with at least a forklift, and everyone would have woken up by a forklift unloading a trailer. My dad suspected the robbers used a pump to get some kind of chloroform into his cabin to make sure he couldn't wake up. And my mum went crazy when they heard this story, for good reason. What if they used too much gas or whatever? Or my dad, who's ex-military, had woken up and tried to play the hero. It could have gone wrong in a lot of ways. The police, who were informed at first, thought my dad was in on it, and we can assure you that almost no cargo transported by an ordinary truck driver without security is worth police investigation. Having the police go through your entire house and belongings is something you don't wish on your worst enemy, in my opinion. It's humiliating, and the entire neighborhood sees you as a criminal. On top of that, you have to work 6-day weeks, and every free day is taken up with the ongoing investigation. It was definitely not a good time to be a deep sleeper. Myself and 2 friends had to drive from Laredo, Texas to Baton Rouge one night in my Ford van. It was around 2 a.m. There's a particularly long and dark section of the highway just outside Laredo, no buildings, towns or lights, for about 50 miles. I was in the right lane coming up to a truck and pulled out into the left passing lane. As I was slowly overtaking this long truck, my peripheral vision caught a sudden movement of this big truck towards the right shoulder. I saw the truck was swerving to avoid hitting a person dressed in all white. White face, whose arms were folded across the chest and eyes were closed as they walked across the highway. I swerved to the left and barely missed this ghostly-looking person with my passenger mirror, and I can still remember seeing the eyes were closed. That's how close we came to this person. I'm not sure if they were real or not, but I know that the other person saw them too. I just drove on. A news that happened in my city a few years ago was about a woman who had been quite depressed and saw a semi parked on an off-ramp and decided that to take her own life, she would lay underneath one of the tires and just wait for him to drive off. No one really knows for sure how long she'd been laying there until someone found what was left of her. But the thought that the trucker probably never knew that he aided in someone taking their life is a really horrible thought. My grandfather was in the Air Force, and one night when he was driving a truck back to base, he saw a woman standing on the side of the road in a long white dress at around 2 a.m. He circled back to ask if she needed help, but by the time he got there, there was no one to be found. He searched for her as well for about an hour before giving up and decided to leave it alone. When he went on his way, he had a strong feeling that he needed to switch lanes, as he was on the road alone in the middle of nowhere at night and had no idea why. And just ahead of the road was a broken down truck with no hazards on that he would have hit and probably killed by if he'd have stayed on the lane he had been in. To this day, he's convinced that that woman was there to give him a warning. I used to drive I-80 between San Francisco and Cheyenne, Wyoming, a lot. It's about 16 to 20 hours of driving depending on weather and traffic. Anyway, one time I got out at a rest stop to stretch my legs and take a leak, and maybe buy a Coke. I go to the bathroom and there are 3 beefy bearded dudes all naked from the waist down, just laying on the ground in a daisy chain. I looked at them and 2 of them looked at me. I just said, sorry, and walked right back out. Oddly, all I could think of was, wow, that floor is probably filthy. A second time I was driving at night, and the car starts making odd grinding noises, like I ran over something that got stuck. It's about 2 a.m. and I pull into a rest stop. It's well lit, and I wake up my buddy who was sleeping. I explain it to him as we get out of the car, and we both hear what sounds like kids crying. There are no other cars at the rest stop, but we frequently heard stories about children trafficking and kidnapping nearby, so we decided to check it out. We grab our flashlights and head towards the noise, which is coming from the bathrooms. As we get closer, we realize it's coming from the women's bathroom, and it's a low, dull sobbing. We're prepared for the worst, and walk in, expecting to see someone brutally beaten. But what we see is nothing. The sound is there, and it's still clearly coming from the room, but the room is empty. We turn on the lights, still nothing. Check each stall, the trash can, nothing. Even start looking for where the hell it's coming from. Nothing. Is it a hidden speaker? Are we on candid camera? What the hell's going on? My buddy climbs up one of the stalls to get to the top window in the rest stop, which is vented out and open. He closes it, and the noise stops completely. Opens it and there's no more noise. We sit there for a few seconds staring at each other, and he shrugs. Then the window slams shut again without him touching it. We were out of that restroom in seconds. The noise starts up about 10 seconds later as we get to the car, and we're tearing out of the parking lot within 10 more seconds. The grinding noise is still there, so this time I pull over a few miles later at a Flying J truck stop, well lit, sometimes occupied. There are a few truckers there, no other civilians. We check under the vehicle, and there's a red and silver piece of metal wedged between that part of the vehicle and the road, about half an inch or so off the ground. So, with us within the vehicle, it must have been grinding against the ground. We can't remove it by hand, it's really wedged in there. So we kick at it to bend it and figure we'll remove it when we get back. A week later I had my mechanic take it out while he was doing a servicing. Turns out it was part of a kid's tricycle, the red area where someone could stand. I don't know why, and I don't think they were connected or anything, but for those moments, it totally messed me up. Many years ago, when I was a trucker, I had something very frightening happen to me. I was driving this particularly long and desolate stretch of highway. The roads were completely straight and the land completely flat. It was an incredibly boring drive with not much to see but forest on either side. Suddenly, up ahead, in the darkness, I see what appears to be a shape forming in the road. I squint to see if I could see it any clearer, and it appears to be a baby's pram. I just about swerve lanes in time to avoid it and manage to get my truck to a complete stop, when suddenly a thought crosses my mind. An old colleague of mine once shared a story that people out in the middle of nowhere will put odd things out in the road for you to either hit them or stop and check what they are. And when you do stop and leave your cab, they will rush you, do who knows what to you, maybe harm, kill, or leave you there and steal your truck and all its contents. That thought flashed before my eyes in that moment, and I made the split decision to start my truck again and keep going. Just as I'm starting to roll away, I look in the rearview mirror. and I notice a few people start to leave the woods and just stare at me. I put my foot to the floor, and I'm glad to still be here. Who knows what would have happened if I'd have left my cab that day. My dad used to be a truck driver in the UK. I remember that he would have to be at the Dover docks really early to start getting the loads to where they needed to go. I don't remember what his destination was, just that he had a really long drive ahead of him. Anyway, he tells me the story. One day he's picked up a load, it's still horribly early, and he has a very long drive ahead of him. He has to drive through some pretty isolated parts of the country to get to where he needs to go on this particular trip, and it's one he didn't do very often. There's part of the journey towards the end that requires the use of country lanes, something I don't think you'd need to do nowadays, but I digress. He's driving along the middle of nowhere in the dead of morning. There's absolutely no one out, not a soul, when suddenly, far up ahead, he sees something. It appears to be a person limping at the side of the road. Now, as you probably know, trucks take a notoriously longer amount of time than cars to slow down because of the weight of the cargo they carry. My dad, wondering who would be limping and if this person needs help, starts to slow his vehicle down. As he does so, he looks out of the passenger window, rolls it down, and asks the person if they need a hand. The guy just ignores him and just carries on limping. My dad puts the truck into a complete stop, jumps out, and goes over to talk to the man. When he's just about to reach the man, he goes to ask him if he's okay, and before his very eyes, the man disappears into thin air, as if his body were less substantial than smoke. Within an instant, he's gone, and my dad just about loses his mind. Whenever he shares this story, he tries to impress upon me the amount of fear he had in that moment, because not only did he see the man when he was far away, he saw him close up, and then saw him turn to nothing. He didn't know how to express that, and made it to the depot shivered, told his boss that he was feeling incredibly unwell, and came straight home. He didn't go back to work for a week. He was that shaken up. I don't know what it was he saw that day, and neither does he, as he's never really one to believe in the paranormal, but it's the closest he's ever come to believing in something, and he's sure it must have been the soul of someone who departed this world long ago, maybe injured on that same road. It often leaves me wondering. This story happened to my dad in the early 70s. He was a long-haul truck driver. I don't remember where he started from, but I do know that he was going to end up in Denver, Colorado, which is where we lived at the time. So, my dad was driving. It was a long stretch of road when he came upon a traffic jam. There had been a pretty messed up accident, and traffic was backed up for miles. He was going to be there a while, so he turned off the engine and just waited patiently, turned on the radio and began to chill. That's when he gets a knock on the side of his window. He looks down and sees this skinny kid, no older than about 20, who's begging and pleading with him to take him. He really needed a ride. He asked my dad in which direction he was going, and he told him he was going to Denver, and the kid said that would be amazing. My dad never said yes, but the kid kind of saw it as an invitation. So the kid goes round and starts opening the side door. For a few moments, my dad debates whether he should lock the door and tell the kid to get lost, or just let him in and be a good Samaritan. Well, like I said, this was still in the days of hitchhiking, and he thinks what the heck. He could use the company. It's going to be a few hours till he gets there, and it'll keep him awake at any rate. So the kid jumps in and they start talking. He seems nice enough and talk about a variety of things, and just after the conversation comes to a lull, does the traffic start moving again, and my dad starts picking up speed. The kid at this point, who had been a complete chatterbox for the last hour and a half, suddenly starts going all quiet. My dad isn't too fussed, and because of the lull in conversation, puts the radio back on and just listens to it while they drive. After about 45 minutes of silence, the kid speaks up, saying he really needs to use the toilet. My dad knows for a fact that there aren't any truck stops in the near future for at least another half hour, and asks the kid if he can wait. The kid is pretty insistent that if he doesn't go now, he'll probably end up doing it in the truck, which my dad is very much against. So he finds the nearest shoulder and pulls off and lets the kid go out into the middle of nowhere to do his business. The kid had been gone at this point for well over 5 minutes, and my dad's starting to get a bit irritated. It's pitch black in the middle of the night, the only lights being that of the truck and the occasional passing vehicle, and the kid has just gone. He starts to worry and wonders if the kid has maybe fallen or something. So he decides to give it a few more minutes before he grabs his flashlight and goes out to investigate. He climbs down from his truck and just feels that something is off. He can't quite put his finger on it. So before he goes out, he goes back in, reaches for his handgun, and slides it into the back of his belt. He walks around slowly and quietly, hoping he'll just hear the kid saying he's done or whatever, or see his footsteps towards the truck. But no such thing. It's getting really weird at this point. My dad's feeling super uncomfortable, and half thinking that maybe he should just leave the kid and hope he can hitchhike with someone else. But he really doesn't want to be that guy, knowing he would leave this kid stranded at night in the middle of nowhere. He looks around the grass and can't see him. He puts his flashlight towards the tree line and can't really see him either, although the foliage is extensive, and he definitely isn't anywhere near the hard shoulder. He wonders if he should go out into the forest to look for him, when suddenly he hears running footsteps from behind him, and someone smash into him and poke a metal blade into the back of his neck. It's the kid. His voice no longer sweet, innocent, and needy. Now it was cold and malicious. "Open the trailer, dude, or I'm gonna have to kill you here and now." My dad was completely taken by surprise and tells the kid calmly that he's gonna go get the key as it's locked. The kid has his knife to his side and tells him to walk slowly. My dad obviously has to climb into the truck, and just as he's getting up, he says he's looking for the key, with the kid waiting at the bottom. He looks around frantically when he sees a magnet that he had picked up ages ago. He throws it to the ground outside and it makes a metal clatter. The kid instinctively looks down, and in that one moment does he slam the door shut and drive away, making sure he locks the passenger door right after locking his own. The kid starts screaming and thrusting the knife at the truck, but it's no use. My dad drives off quickly and the kid retreats, abandoned in the middle of nowhere. My dad felt a mix of relief and fear, because he really hoped no one else would pick up the kid, and wondered if he'd get in trouble for leaving someone dangerous on the side of the road. He tried reporting it to the police, but by the time they even went out there, he was long gone, and he never had any follow-up. But he often wonders what happened to the kid who would have killed him out in the middle of nowhere. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I do hope you enjoyed tonight's trucker stories. If you did, you can let me know in the usual way. I'd like to extend an extra thanks to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen. for their continued support of the channel. For signing up to either platform, you get a number of benefits. Links to those can be found in the description. But until next time, thank you so much for listening. You can find more stories on screen now if you are so inclined. But until then, stay awesome. I'll see you in the next one.